Kent Ervin. I think most of you know me, and that I'm the director of the Homeland Security program here at the Aspen Institute. Welcome to Aspen on my own behalf and behalf of the President and CEO, Walter Isaacson. We're delighted today to have here as our special guest Tim Healy, the director of the Terrorist Screening Center. We're going to hear from Mr. Healy shortly, but before we begin, just a couple of quick words of announcement. You have before you, of course, Mr. Healy's bio, and I'll be talking more about that in a second. I wanted to mention that we've got two major events coming up at the Aspen Institute that I want to call your attention to. One is the Aspen Security Forum. As many of you know, for a number of years, for 5 years now, the Aspen Institute has done an Aspen Ideas Festival, a week-long confab to focus on a wide range of issues. And there are smaller spin-off forums on the environment and health. For the first time ever this summer, we're doing an Aspen Security Forum focused on Homeland Security and counterterrorism issues. If you go to the website that's listed there, you'll see our list of confirmed speakers, which includes Admiral Mullen, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, former Homeland Security Secretary Michael Chertoff, and we have tentative commitments from Secretary Napolitano and from Mike Leiter, the Director of the National Counterterrorism Center. So I hope that you all will make plans to join us in Aspen this summer, June 28th to July 1st. And we have a terrific partnership with INSA. And we have a number of representatives of INSA with us today. And this luncheon today is part of a speaker series that we are sponsoring the Aspen Institute jointly with INSA, the Intelligence and National Security Alliance. And our next event is April 13. That morning there will be a breakfast session where the featured speaker will be my former colleague on DHS transition, Rand Beers, who, as you know, is now the Undersecretary at the Department of Homeland Security for National Protections and the Programs Directorate, and he'll be interviewed by the legendary Charlie Allen, the former Undersecretary for Intelligence and Analysis of the Department of Homeland Security. Well, with that, by way of introductory remarks, let me turn now to the program today. Mr. Healy, we're delighted to have you here. I won't take time from this presentation to read your bio, except to note, of course, that you're the director of the Terrorist Screening Center, and you actually established the Terrorist Screening Center, and so helped to establish it at the inception, so present at the creation. And with that, we're delighted that you're here and look forward very much to hearing from you.
Clark, thank you very much. And I see some familiar faces out there. I'm not sure how much I'm going to add to this, but I appreciate the opportunity to talk about the Terrorist Screening Center. It's kind of hit the press a little bit as of late. A lot of stuff going on since the Christmas Day event, and I look forward to kind of sharing with you the Terrorist Screening Center, what we do and how we do it. Let me start out with the first slide if I can, and I won't talk while it's going on, but just wait. Obviously, that event precipitated the Terrorist Screening Center. That event, I think all of us can think about exactly what occurred that day and how our lives were changed. My life was certainly changed significantly since that day. That day I was actually the unit chief of the Internet Fraud Complaint Center and actually had built the Internet Fraud Complaint Center. Was coming down the hill. I had actually taken the day off and was listening to Howard Stern. And he talked about a plane that had hit the building. And as a former pilot for the Marine Corps, I used to fly Harrier jump jets. I'm thinking, my God, what an idiot, number one. And number two, the weather must be so horrible. How could that have occurred? And then he reported shortly after that that a second plane had hit, and I think we all understood exactly what was going on. During that night, or that day, I actually called my section chief because the Internet Fraud Complaint Center, IFCC at the time now, Internet Crime Complaint Center, was the first time that we took online tips, online complaints about internet fraud. And I talked to my supervisor at the time and had suggested that we convert the web page to start taking online terrorist tips. And he told me at that moment, this is like moments after the second plane hit, he told me make it happen. I called my center. I was actually on leave. I was actually moving from one point to another, so I had loaded stuff up into a truck. I took it off the truck, threw it back into the rental facility, and got on the phone and started talking to my IT guy at the Internet Fraud Complaint Center and said, the guy's name was Bud. We called him Bud Light. And I said, Bud, we need to convert the web page over to take online terrorist tips. I'll never forget at the time he told me, it's going to take us 5 or 6 hours. And I said, I don't think we have that much time. I hit my stopwatch and I said, look, we've got to just convert some pages over to start doing it. and started my journey about 100 miles an hour to get back to the Internet Fraud Complaint Center. And when I got there, he had come up to me and said, we need to make some changes, so we made some adjustments. And then they came to me a short time later and said, hey, we're ready to take the tips. I looked down at my watch and 86 minutes had passed. And I said, let's do it. Later that night, the Attorney General had announced the website, and we started getting 1,200 hits an hour. As kind of this is the rest of the story, if you go to FBI.gov and where it says submit a tip, and you click onto that web page, that was the code that my guys wrote on that event that day. It hadn't changed to take online tips. And so that's kind of where I was. At that point, from that point on, I ended up staying several days at the Internet Fraud Complaint Center to get that process established. And so it was kind of a change in the way we did business. But the reason I use this slide is I just want the folks to remember that day, and something that I talk to my employees every day about and that is, if we make a mistake, people are going to die. Assume that's the case. And we cannot afford to make a mistake. Bottom line is that the terrorists, all they have to do is get by once, and they've succeeded. We have to be right each and every time. And so that's a grave responsibility for everybody there, and I just kind of remind us of that fact. HSPD 6 formed the Terrorist Screening Center. And what was interesting about this came out September 16th of 2003. It wasn't 2001. It wasn't 2002. It was September of 2003. And the question is why? The why was, during this time, the administration, Congress were being briefed on a regular basis about the terrorist threats. The question that the president asked at that time was, is that guy watch listed? And oftentimes his response was, well, for our agency he is, but for my agency he's not. And he would look at the director, he would look at the head of CIA and ask him that question, have we got this together? Are we coordinated? And the answer back then was, well, we kind of are. And the president demanded that, look, the American people expect more of us. They expect a coordinated approach. So as a result of that, they drafted HSPD 6, and HSPD 6 is a very simple document. It's kind of what formed us. It's exactly what did form us. HSPD 6 and the accompanying MOU talks about that we've got to have a consolidated approach. We've got to screen these, and it's got to make sense. We not only have to have a consolidated approach, but we have to have a consolidated watch list. We have to have one. It also talks about how the feeds of information are going to go, and I'm going to go into detail about that. It also talks about international sharing and establishing that. And then finally, it talks about you can do all those things, but you still have to protect civil liberties and protect privacy issues, because if you don't do both, then you failed. And that's the challenge. The challenge is that challenging balancing act between it. And the reality is, if we lose one or the other, then we failed. If we have a terrorist attack, we failed. But if we violate somebody's civil liberties, we fail as well. So with that said, this next slide just talks about it is truly a multi-agency tasking. It has DHS and all its components. It has FBI and all its components. And this is interesting because the subsystems that we service, the organizations that we support, there's representatives from those agencies at the Terrorist Screening Center that report to me. We have TSA representatives that work with the no-fly selectee list. They report to me. Those are duty experts that work on the consolidation and determine who should go in no-fly or selectee, and ultimately that decision is mine. So that's the agencies that we work with. And then when we started, it was very interesting, because back then, you can hold this for just a second before we go. Back then, it was very interesting because you think about the watch listing and what it was like back then, and different agencies had different groups of people. I will never forget this individual from Department of State, John Ariza, was sitting back at Department of State and said, I'm getting all these terrorists. We ought to put them in a box, or we ought to collect them somehow, some way. And that was back in the early 80s. And he put them in a box, literally. And then that box got too small, and he put them in a 5-drawer filing cabinet. And then that filing cabinet got too small. He said, well, we ought to create a database, and that database was tip-off. That was the baseline for the Terrorist Screening Center. But what we did was we looked at numerous different databases that had the watch list. And so the challenge was September 16th, you've got to set up the Terrorist Screening Center, and December 1st of 2003, it has to be up and running. So that's literally a couple months. How do you do that? First of all, you start with tip-off, which we did, and then you go to the different agencies and say, do you have terrorist information? Let's start putting it together, and we did. So we went from there to CLASS, which is a Department of State's case management system, to TEXT, which is a Department of Homeland Security, it used to be Treasury, to the no-fly selectee list, to a system called NAILS, which doesn't exist anymore, the National Automated Immigration Lookout System, to IDENT, which still exists, to the Warrant Information, to NCIC VIGTOF at the time, to IAFIS, which is fingerprints, to Interpol, and to DoD systems as well. So what we ended up doing was we reached out to all those different agencies and said, give us your terrorist names, and let's consolidate them into one database, and we did. And that's what forms the Terrorist Screening Center database, the TSDB, or which is oftentimes referred to as the Terrorist Watch List. And so that's how it started back in those early days. We had days and weeks to get that particular system up and running. Now the next challenge is how do you make all that system available to, how do you make those names available to every state and local law enforcement officer? How do you make it available to every DHS Customs Border Protection individual at the borders? How do you make that system available to all the no-fly selectee? How do you make it available to every consular affairs when somebody's applying for a visa? How do you make it available to our foreign partners? And how do you make it available to every FBI agent? Well, what you do is that you create this database and say, look at it. Well, the reality is if I, in my own agency, the FBI, said, before you start a case, you've got to look at the Terrorist Screening Center database, you know, we may get a high percentage, we may get a low percentage, I don't know, but we're not going to get 100%. And so what we did was we looked at existing systems. And we said when a law enforcement officer pulls somebody over in the street, what system they look at? They look at NCIC, the National Crime Information Center. So if you put the TSDB and reside it there, then every time somebody stops somebody on the street, or when they check somebody because they come into a university to do a speech, or for example, and these are all positive identifications that we had, if you go into a law enforcement agency, if you go into a police department and say, I want to expunge my record, how do I do it? Well, they query NCIC and look and say, this guy's a known or suspected terrorist, I've got to call the FBI. So all of those ways, you make it so that you do their existing system. So let me tell you how a name gets so that a law enforcement officer can see it, or how somebody gets on the no-fly selectee, or how when somebody comes up to the border, they query their system and how they do it. You've heard a lot about the National Counterterrorism Center. You've heard a lot about the TSC. This is how it works. If you look to the far left of that particular slide, you've got the law enforcement community and that circle that has all of the intelligence community. Each one of those different agencies has a component within it that they do watch listing. The FBI has a unit that if you want to submit a name to watch listing, it goes to that unit. And the unit understands the rules and policies and the guidelines, the watch listing standards for that. And so those units within those different agencies will receive that nomination. So they screen it once. So it gets vetted once. Then if you go on the top, excuse me, if you're talking about domestic terrorism, you go to the top of that slide, all domestic terrorism gets vetted a second time through the FBI. Okay? Granted, that's a smaller portion of TSDB, but every FBI, that unit will vet all domestic terrorism. It comes from anywhere. The bottom is National Counterterrorism Center. That's all international terrorists. NCTC is responsible for holding all those, plus the derogatory information. So if it's an international terrorist, it'll get vetted a second time through NCTC. Okay, so as each one of those vets those particular nominations, they decide whether it goes or doesn't go. And then if it goes to the Terrorist Screening Center. We vet it a third time. We vet it to make sure it meets reasonable suspicion, vet it to make sure it has the appropriate biographical identifiers, it's got the names. Excuse me, we take a look at the derogatory information that's housed in NCTC or with the FBI, and to make sure it warrants that. And then if all of those parameters are met, then it goes into the Terrorist Screening Center watch list. Now, then it gets fed out to the different agencies. It gets fed out primarily to NCIC based on how much information you have. Do you have a name, plus one identifier as an example? It gets vetted out to DHS if you have a first name, last name. It gets vetted out to no-fly selectee if it has a first name, last name, and a date of birth. And I'll talk about the challenges with the no-fly selectee list as well. Again, it gets vetted out to the Department of State, class, gets vetted out to the FBI and our foreign partners. You'll see the little star up there. That's the additional vetting, the scrutiny that we provide for no-fly selectee. There is subject matter experts from TSA that look at it again. When that name gets vetted to them, it'll get approved, looked at by a supervisor at the Terrorist Screening Center before it gets entered into no-fly selectee. So that's that process. When you hear about the Terrorist Screening Center, you often hear about this particular process, the watch listing process. There's another component, and that's the encounters, and I'll talk about that as well. But let me talk about the subsystems right now. And this is important to note, and this is very difficult because when people start thinking no-fly selectee, they think that's the terrorist watch list. When you look to the left, TSDB is a big set. There's about 420,000 people. I think I've reported 418, between 418 and 420,000 people today that are in the Terrorist Screening Center database. Okay? Of that, there's a small portion that make the no-fly selectee. Okay? Again, it's a requirement of full first name, full last name, and full date of birth. And they have to meet the derogatory, this is the derogatory piece of the no-fly selectee. There's a number of categories or criteria for the no-fly selectee. What I've talked about it in very general terms. The general terms are, one, if you're a threat to aviation, if you want to blow up a plane, that'll get you on the no-fly list. Okay, that makes sense. Two, if you're a threat to national security, that'll get you on the no-fly list. Okay, those are the two general categories. And then there's a selectee criteria. The selectee criteria is obviously a step down. It's not that you want to blow up a plane. It may be that you've attended a terrorist training camp, something like that. So it's a different criteria. So the no-fly selectee is a portion of it. The challenge with the no-fly selectee, and in fact, in Congress, I briefed the Senator Lieberman's Homeland Security Committee meeting, and one of the questions he was talking to me specifically about, why not have the selectee list, the entire rest of TSDB? And when I answered him, I said, sir, that's exactly what I thought back in 2003. I was a proponent of that. The challenge with the no-fly selectee list, I talk about the balance that we have. Right now today, the no-fly selectee list is actually screened by the air carriers. Okay, so that if you put your reservation for United, they will actually screen against the no-fly selectee. When the no-fly selectee goes out to TSA, what they do is they put it on a website, a secure website, and the airlines take that down every day. The airlines screen against that. Okay, so they use their screening algorithms to screen against that. That's the challenge. So that not only goes to United, it also goes to Aeroflot, Russia Aeroflot. It also goes to Air France. So the problem is that you're giving the list to air carriers. In some cases, that list will be available because some of the air carriers are owned by our foreign countries. Okay, Air France is partially owned, I understand, by France. So that's the challenge you have. Do you want to give the entire list out? And the challenge is, the answer is no, not right now. So right now we just look at, again, that balancing act between civil liberties, between getting the list out, privacy issues, and protecting the American people. And it's not so much the civil liberties as protecting the American people, because there are people out there, believe it or not, that have determined that they're watch listed and actually do positive or negative things, depending on how you look at it, not to be caught. So they actually positively try to change their identity so that they're not watch listed. So if one is to know that they're on the watch list, we've seen it where people understand they're on the watch list and try to hide their identities, to change their identities, okay, in order to beat the system. So that's a challenge with no-fly selectee. The NCIC is pushed out to state and law enforcement officers, and every person that stops somebody on the street, every person that's gone into a police department to get their record expunged, just check through NCIC, and they'll come up positive. They're a no-fly selectee. And I'll talk again about how those encounters occur. Class, it used to be for the class export that it would only be non-U.S. citizens. It would only be, non-U.S. citizens. But then what happened was that we actually had domestic terrorists that were purely domestic, no international connection, that actually applied for passports. And then what happened was the Department of State said, what about when people apply for passports? We can't deny them the passport, but it's a potential encounter, and it's something that we can screen against. What happens on every single one of these encounters is when you positively encounter them, the case agent knows, and I'll talk about that in much more detail. Text is a system that's used by Department of Homeland Security. So everybody at the border, when you come into the border, they'll query text to see if that guy is potentially on the watch list. If he is, an encounter occurs. Again, I'll explain that as well. ACS, if any FBI agent initiates a case, they'll always check ACS and it'll come up. So if you have somebody that's been nominated by the agency as an example, and an FBI agent didn't know about it, when he queries NCIC, when he initiates a case, that'll pop up. The agent will know, hey, this guy's already watch listed. We'll reach out to us and we'll have a coordinated approach. I've got to tell you, I've been with the federal government for over 30 years. I've been with the FBI for almost 25 years. With the Terrorist Screening Center, I've never seen such a coordinated approach in my life. It really is a cooperative effort between all agencies. And I'll give you some specific examples about that. Next slide.
What about the part that, is it just a diagram, or is there more information in that barrel that doesn't fit into any of those systems?
It's a good question.
Your slide set up?
Yeah. If you are watch listed in TSDB, at a minimum, you're going into class and text, at a minimum. Based on the criteria for each other support database, it's based on their requirements. NCIC, as an example, is first name, last name, +1. So, if you just had a first name, last name, and you do have that on some occasion, you wouldn't go into NCIC. And the reason for it is that you wouldn't get a really true match, and you'd get, if a police officer stopped someone in the street, they'd be stopping Tim Healy all the time, and that wouldn't be a true match. And so the law enforcement community has said, look, I need something more specific, so I need a first name, last name, +1 in order to effectively do the screening. DHS and Department of State don't. Why? Because they have much more time. If somebody applies for a visa, you have much more time to determine, is this guy watch listed? If a police officer stops someone in the street, he doesn't have weeks to be able to make that identification. He has minutes. And so based on the mission set, based on the time that this particular person has in screening, based on all that, that's how it goes out. So bottom line is that DHS and Department of State will get everything, and so will the FBI. The other entities won't, based on the criteria. That help?
Yes.
Okay. These are basically our primary customers. I've talked about that. It comes to the FBI, Department of State, for anybody applying for a visa or a passport. Homeland Security, anybody entering ports of entry. TSA for no-fly selectee, and all federal, state, local, tribal law enforcement agencies are our primary customers.
Could I ask you a question on that?
Shoot.
And not only as a customer, but also as a potential producer, where do entities like the Five Eyes community and others fit into this for DROG information?
We have foreign carriers, and we actually exchange with, and that the actual foreign government, some of it's classified, some of it's not. We actually exchange with a number of foreign countries right now. What we do is we actually go out there and set up a memorandum of understanding. When we have encounters with the embassies, and we have encounters going from point A to point B, and they include different countries, we actually reach out to our legats out in those particular companies that reach out to the countries and coordinate with them. We've had a real successful cooperative effort between Mexico and Canada that's been going on well before the Terrorist Screening Center existed. So those entities have been very effective as well. Does that help? Okay. So today, if you're coming into the border, if you're flying on an airline, if you're stopped by a state or local officer, if you're applying for a passport, if you're purchasing a gun, if you're applying for a hazmat license, and I think I'm a little faster than the slides, if you're a port worker, if you're at a special event, and I know that we've got the special event that's going to pop up here, the Olympics. We used to have the Redskins. I'm from Chicago, and I didn't know why we couldn't include the Chicago Bears when they played in '86, but we didn't. If you apply for a visa, if you apply for citizenship, in any of those entities, you are screened against the terrorist watch list, okay, on all of those particular encounters. And every time you're screened against the terrorist watch list, they reach out either indirectly or directly to the Terrorist Screening Center, which is our second function, and that's how we handle encounters, okay? It's basically kind of a four-tiered approach, okay? We share with countries, And the reason we do that is we want to make sure that we identify the terrorists well before they come into the country. We share with Department of State because we want to be able to identify them if they're attempting to come into the country, either applying for a visa or working with our consular affairs. We share with DHS because if they're at the borders, we want to be able to screen against them. And the last piece is if they actually, if they get by that or they're somehow in the country, we want to make sure that that information is available to our state and local partners so if they come across a known or suspected terrorist, officer safety, and a potential encounter. So we do it on basically those 4 approaches. The actual encounters, let me talk about how that works, okay? And the slide's a little bit confusing. Let me kind of walk you through it. As I talked about, the TSDB gets it, and then we feed it to those entities. Right now, NCIC, text and class. What happens with text and class is we export to them every day, okay? Every day, every year, except I think on Sunday, they get an export. It's an add, modifier, delete. Every day from NCTC, we get between 400 and 1,200 adds, modifies, and deletes every day. Okay? When we get it into the Terror Screening Center database, we review it, and then it goes out to text and class, to support their systems. NCIC is a little bit different. Now, we're eventually going to have this type of interface with all of them, but NCIC is known as a transactional interface. The transactional interface means once it's entered into TSDB, okay, once it qualifies for that, and we get it, a second later NCIC gets it. So if we got it at 12:01 in the afternoon, if a police officer was to stop somebody at 12:02 and they were in TSDB at 12:01, he'd be able to see it at 12:02. Okay, if we got it into TSDB at 12:01, a consular affairs or person at the border wouldn't be able to see it to the following morning. Okay, that's not good enough. That balancing act, if we make a mistake, people die. We got to get it in there. And so we're working on transactional interfaces on all of our partners right now so that when we get it, they have it. Okay? But, so they have it. So it rests within their particular databases they query every day as a matter of routine. So as an example, click. As an example, when he gets this worked out, if a law enforcement officer stops somebody on the street, they query NCIC, and then it'll kick back to them and say, this guy is a potential known or suspected terrorist. Similarly, if somebody at the border queries into their text system, which is what they'll do, it'll pop up and say you're dealing with you may be dealing with a known or suspected terrorist. If somebody applies for a visa and they query their class system, it'll pop up and say this guy may be a known or suspected terrorist. In all of those cases, what they'll do is they'll look at that. And in the case of an NCIC for a police officer, think about this. And we didn't have this before. A guy is on a lonely interstate at 2 o'clock in the morning. He pulls somebody over. He pulls somebody over, and he queries NCIC, and it pops up, on his screen in his car. You may be dealing with a known or suspected terrorist. Call the Terror Screening Center. Okay? As a law enforcement officer, and I know we've got some law enforcement officers in this room. We've got some former and retired law enforcement officers in this room. Okay, that's good officer safety, number one, and number two, their whole radar screen changes. Okay, now I'm dealing with a known or suspected terrorist. I'm looking like I wouldn't look before. Not that a law enforcement officer wouldn't look hard at 2 o'clock in the morning, but when I'm dealing with a known or suspected terrorist, I guarantee you he's looking a lot harder. He's looking at, is there anything in the back? Where's this guy's hands? Who is he with? What's going on? Okay? And that encounter, when that occurs, we will know within 5 to 10 minutes if it's the person. Okay? And what we do is it's very interesting because we're looking at classified information, and I'm on the phone with a law enforcement officer in an unclassified setting. How do you do it? I'm looking at this guy, and I know that this guy's a bomber, and I know that 2 of his fingers are blown off because he was trying to bomb and it blew him off. What do I say to the law enforcement officer? What I say is check his right hand. The officer comes back and says he's missing 2 fingers. That's the guy. Okay? I don't have to talk classified over him. I don't have to say this guy was a bomber. All I have to say is check his right hand, as an example. 2 fingers are missing. It's the guy. Okay? That happens within 5 to 10 minutes of the encounter. Okay? Similarly, on text, they'll query their text system. It'll come back on their system. It's a potential match. Now, I know this is hard to believe, but Customs Border Protection doesn't only deal in terrorism. They deal in a whole bunch more. They deal in criminal stuff. They deal in drugs. They deal in everything. So what happens is they do the initial vet through the National Targeting Center. So if they get a potential match, anything at all, they route that to NTC, the National Targeting Center. They do exactly the same thing. If they deem it's a positive match, they route it to us. And exactly the same thing occurs, which I'll explain. Excuse me. Similarly, for Department of State class, they query their system. What they do is they draft a security advisory opinion, SAO, and that'll send to the Terror Screening Center and say, is this guy a potential match? We get literally thousands of potential matches a year, and we have approximately 600 to 800 positive matches a year. So 600 to 800 people that are applying for visas come up as a positive match in the Terror Screening Center database. Okay? What the Terror Screening Center does in the case of a class hit is they will confirm it's a positive match. That'll go back to the Consular Affairs, and the Consular Affairs will start a series of processes to gather a bunch of information, and they'll ultimately make that decision of whether or not this guy is going to be granted a visa. Okay? Department of Homeland Security, very similarly, they will work with us. They will reach out to us, to NTC. NTC will reach out to us, very similar to the NCIC hit when we're dealing with the police officer. Once we get a positive match, when it gets to the Terror Screening Center, we reach out to TSOU. I know you got a lot of letters, the Terror Screening Operational Unit. That is the FBI unit that handles all encounters, and we coordinate that operational response. What TSOU will do is they will actually reach out to the case agent and say, hey, your guy is stopped on I-95 going south to Florida, as an example. You know, he'll be talking to the New York office. New York office says, you know, thank you very much. Let's get the local JTTF to go out and interview the guy. That may occur. What you can have on a law enforcement response, you can have both ends of the spectrum. You can have, okay, there's a warrant for his arrest, pick him up. Or you can have, don't do anything, just gather information. Okay? That law enforcement officer will do what they normally do. Now, I'll share with you the unprecedented international sharing and national sharing that we've had. I can remember the early days when the Terror Screening Center opened up. The trepidation that agents had about putting everything into the watch list. My director, Director Moeller, ordered every single terrorist case that we have will be watch listed. He did that because he wanted to make sure that we shared with the community, and he wanted to make sure that officer safety was protected. Now, there was a lot of concern among the agents that they would notify the individual, that CBP or the law enforcement officer would notify the guy, hey, you're watch listed. Okay? Real concern about that. Concern that they were going to blow the case. Okay? We've had 100,000 positive encounters since the Terror Screening Center existed. There's been 20 to 30,000 positive encounters with state and local law enforcement. I used to do a slide, and I don't do this publicly, but I do it with the intelligence community. I show some of the intel that we got and some of the positive information that we got that agents didn't know about. I remind agents about this driver's license that the law enforcement officer got that the agent didn't know about. I remind the agents about all these cell phone numbers that the law enforcement just got by asking questions, you know, doing his normal law enforcement stop, and that he would normally do in a 5 or 10 minute stop. And every single one of those encounters has resulted in positive intelligence. Every single one of the encounters at the borders has resulted in positive intelligence. We're talking thousands, you know. And what that tells me is that community as a whole, you know, understands the significance of this. And then remember when I told you before, if we make a mistake, people are going to die. They understand the significance of when they're dealing with that particular guy right then and there.
Sir, let me just stop you, if I may,
Sure,
just to open it up a bit for questions, and we can return to this if you know if the questions
Certainly.
are. But I think it's a great overview. Let me just start the questions, and I'll open it up because I know there are going to be a lot that you've put on the table. You know, one of the problems before the recent spate of incidents, I would argue starting in September and obviously culminating in the 1225 incident, was that there was a lot of pressure on you and your colleagues in the counterterrorism community to the effect that there were too many names on the watch lists. Now, the pressure is that there are too few, and so you've got to put a lot more names. How do you deal with this whipsaw that you have between complacency and hysteria?
Well, Clark, we may agree or we may disagree. You know, when the Terror Screening Center started, who goes on no-fly, who goes on selectee, we didn't know. You know, watch listing was very new to us. And I think what you saw, Clark, is I remember you during your IG days when I was at the Terror Screening Center. And I got to tell you, I've been with the FBI for 24 years. I've never been so IG'd. And, you know, it's a good thing. I got to tell you, the interesting thing about DHS was, not DHS, but the TSC, is it had all these components. So you had components of DHS, components of DOJ, components of Department of State. And so you had all of those IG looks. And the IG looks were very helpful. They were very productive. They identified some challenges that we had that we needed to address. But back in the early days, the no-fly selectee was very fluid and really was trying to kind of figure out how that process worked. Back in those days, the derogatory information wasn't defined. Reasonable suspicion wasn't defined. And what we were getting was we would get, you know, from certain agencies, there'd be a wide variety of what they thought should be watch listed, what they thought shouldn't be watch listed. As a result of that, what we did was, and this is back in 2008, we actually have an interagency board that is made up of all of the different representations of the intelligence community and law enforcement to get together in one room and say, does this make sense? How do we do that? And back in 2008, as I've testified before Congress, they came up with, the reasonable suspicion standard, which is a standard that we went by. That came out. We continued on with the no-fly list. Back in February of 2009, it was actually about 6 months before that, we noticed that, you know, the no-fly list, you know, has criteria, but it's not quite enough. And as a result of that, in February of 2009, it actually expanded to include different people based on our experience in terms of watch listing. So, it does look kind of like a seesaw, but I can tell you, when you take a look at the overall growth of the list, it's been fairly stable for the last couple years. I will tell you that, and I've testified about this as well, that the no-fly list, selectee list, because of the Christmas Day event, expanded. It expanded because we weren't sure what we were looking at. And as a result, they started looking at the threat-based reporting, and as a result of that, certain individuals were moved up. Those individuals, very quickly were moved down. Other people were moved up, and they've been vetting them. Part of that vetting process was the agency, the FBI, were asked on a group of people to look deep into their systems to see if there's any potential additional information that the U.S. government may have. That review is ongoing and continues to be ongoing. And as that review gets completed, people get pulled down, get pulled off. But what you see is you see from the immediately after the Christmas Day event, a reaction because of the threat-based reporting, and based on that threat reporting, a number of people were shuffled around within the Terror Screening Center database.
Thank you. All right, Randy?
Why is the no-fly list an airline function? You said there's some sensitivity of giving out that information, but the big transportation center out there by Dulles, I thought
right.
That's for the taxpayer dollars. So you're saying they're not looking at it? It's the airlines?
No. The TSA monitors it. TSA, makes it available to the airlines. TSA works with us. The TSA's got an intel component that works with us as well. That's the limitation of what we have because, again, may I call you Randall?
Yeah, Randy.
Randy, again, the challenge was how do we've got to make this available. Actually, I did not walk into the Terror Screening Center on September 16th. I actually started October 27th of 2003 and was given the assignment of getting it up and running along with a group of people. So we didn't have a lot of time. So what we did was we looked at what were the existing systems. The no-fly selectee was screened by the airlines. DHS right now has gone through an evolutionary change, and they've got a system that they're standing up, and they've been doing it for the last couple of years. It's called Secure Flight. Secure Flight will take over that screening process. When that comes on board, in fact, this was a question that Senator Lieberman and Senator Collins had asked about when they talked about how big do you think the selectee list should be. That balancing act, when you give it to the airlines, you've got to be very careful. When Secure Flight comes on board, as I stated then, that needs to be another dialogue that we need to have, because at that point now the U.S. government has taken over that screening process, and the passenger manifest and the passenger names we're going to be pushed over to TSA. TSA has 2 facilities that they've set up to do that screening, and that's in the testing phase right now. And I believe Secure Flight is supposed to roll out by the end of this year.
Okay, Blas?
Nice to see you again.
Good to see you. I understand the concern about giving the list to the airlines and the role Secure Flight will play.
Right.
But our understanding, or my understanding, is that for international flights to the U.S., the screening against the watch list is hosted through the CBP
Right.
AQQ system.
Right.
So what would be the impediment to, at least for international flights to the U.S., expanding the selectee list? Not for all flights, but just to those that come internationally to the U.S. and are screened through the AQQ system.
Actually, DHS, and it's a great point, DHS doesn't just screen the no-fly selectee, they screen the entire list. And so if you're getting on a plane with DHS, or getting on a plane to come into the U.S., that's screened already. And so DHS is able to identify selectees and identify no-flies. And so they screen it right now. So that process is going. Now, what doesn't occur is the additional scrutiny that individual goes under for a selectee doesn't occur yet. That doesn't happen right now. Because of the...
So, but the concern about expanding the selectee list, because the airlines have access to it, that wouldn't really apply for international flights to the U.S.
It does because, right now DHS has the ability to say issue a no board. And they issue no boards not for just no fly for a variety of reasons because the person is a criminal or something like that. And that's a DHS function. I'm not involved in that. But they have the latitude to be able to do it now. So they do screen. The question is do they have the ability to screen before the people get on the plane? And they've done that on some occasions.
Stephen?
Hi.
Sorry.
You had mentioned IAFIS earlier, and I wanted to know, was there any relationship between TSDB and NGIC or the Army Biometrics Task Force?
Yeah, actually, with the biometrics has brought in kind of a new function that we have. HSPD 24, if you're familiar with that presidential directive, talks about that we want to include biometrics. We actually do at some point. Right now, we can actually receive, hold, and export biometrics, fingerprints, irises, and photos. And we've actually done that on some occasions. I gave the example of a print that we had. And we actually came across a KST known as suspected terrorist that actually knew he was on the watch list, changed his identity, and as sometimes they often do, was arrested anyway on a DUI, was fingerprinted, and IAFIS was the positive hit from our criminal justice information system, CJIS, out in West Virginia, a component of the FBI, that actually identified that individual. And lo and behold, he was on the watch list, identified his new identity, and then watch listed that as well. So it happens.
Prakash? Let's use those microphones for the...
Question I have is, one of the things that I've been seeing a lot of, and again, I was the ombudsman at DHS, the immigration ombudsman, and currently am in private practice. And what I'm seeing a lot of is a lot of foreign nationals, and let's be a little more specific, Muslim foreign nationals coming from India, Pakistan, the Middle East, are being stopped by the consular system, the CCD basically, on a SAO, Security Advisory Opinion. And what transpires after that is what's of most concern, and that is that they get cleared, but immediately after they get cleared, they get put back on the list. And this happens multiple times. And these individuals end up getting stuck for weeks and months where they had absolutely no reason to be stuck again and again. Right. But what's even worse is they get the visa, and then a day later they fly to the U.S.
And they're
stuck.
Right.
Well, they're stuck at the CBP point for a few hours. And they eventually get through, but right. the concern I have is many of these are people that are very well-known, very pro-U.S. Entertainers and various other folks, and they seem to be getting stuck more and more often. I've had at least a half a dozen within the last couple of weeks.
Click over a couple slides. Keep going. Keep going. I want to address that very specifically, but let me just kind of walk through some of my issues. When you talked about SAOs, SAOs are not just because you are a match to the terrorist watch list. They draft up SAOs for a variety of reasons. The terrorist watch list is a segment of that. Being a potential match to the terrorist watch list is a segment of that. There's a whole host of security issues. You know, Department of Homeland Security, check that, Department of State, you know, has the ability, you know, and we'll look at, you know, if this guy's a wanted felon, things like that. So it's very much like DHS in that, again, you're not surprised that DHS is not just screening against terrorism, they're screening against a number of things. That's number one. So just because there's an SAO doesn't mean it's a terrorist SAO. That's point one. And I do want to address the other thing, but I do want to share with you this. Redress. And with Ombudsman, you can certainly appreciate this. Redress, there's been, you know, just under 80,000 redress complaints, people that thought they were watch listed. And a very, very small portion of those were actually watch listed. 99.3% of all the people that think they're watch listed that file a redress complaint aren't. Okay, there's a very small percentage that go to the Terrorist Screening Center to work with DHS about this particular redress process. And those are basically the numbers. So when you look at that 0.7%, I'm talking, you know, less than 1% are actually watch listed. So there's a whole host of reasons that people think that they're watch listed and they aren't. There's just normal things that happen every day when somebody, you know, goes through, a border. It just naturally occurs. They automatically assume I'm on the no-fly list because I didn't get on this plane. And my point is that there's a lot of people that think, you know, I must be watch listed, or there's an issue with the watch listing that's not. That's not factually correct. And my point is that I get a lot of those complaints, and I can't talk with any specificity about any individual. I can tell you that we work with the redress process if somebody is watch listed, or if they've complained that they're watch listed, their name's in the paper, or they filed a complaint with a congressman. We automatically, even if they haven't come to us to say, I think I'm watch listed, check to see if they are. Sometimes it may be the same name. You know, that Tim Healy is actually a person that's watch listed, but then I'm Tim Healy that's not watch listed. So what we do is we work with DHS to proactively work it so that we identify, without even the individual knowing it, that that's not the Tim Healy, this is Tim Healy with this date of birth and Tim Healy with that date of birth. Let the good Tim Healy go and the bad Tim Healy not go. And so it's a challenge. The problem with the watch listing issue, it's a name-based system. You know, we're going to biometrics, you know, and a fingerprint will get you free. But right now, we're working with a name-based system, so there's challenges with that.
Just one quick follow-up. The issue, though, here is that these are visitors who have their fingerprints on file.
Right.
They come through, and there should be a way of distinguishing them,
right,
because we seem to be getting 99% of the people that are not the folks we need to be looking
right
for. And we're only...
No, but I understand that. But my point is that they're stopped because of a number of other reasons, not because of the terrorist watch list. That's one. Two, we do proactively when we identify not only positive hits, but negative hits. You know, where you're looking at somebody that says, this guy is the same name match, but it's not the guy. We will, unknown to him, proactively make his life easier. And there's a guy that I know that has not a very similar name to somebody watch listed, but it is the same name. And the year is, you know, a couple years off. And he has the same problem. We work with him, and my barometer is, you know, when he travels extensively. How'd the trip go this time? It went very well. So we are proactively doing that. I got to tell you, the redress process back in 03 and 04 was a dream. You know, we talked about this redress process that we would have. Well, that would be someday. When I left the Terror Screening Center and came back 30 months later, the redress process was there. And I was amazed at the ability to help people. Again, it's a balancing act between civil liberties, you know, and protecting the American people. I can tell you this. The U.S. government, the Terror Screening Center, Customs Border Protection, DHS, Department of State, does not want to hassle innocent people. They don't want to slow anybody up. They don't want to slow up commerce. They don't want to slow up anything. That's why this process has been so productive. Because people, when they're dealing with a known or suspected terrorist, understand the ramifications of it. They also understand the civil liberties. And when you're not dealing with one and you're inconveniencing somebody, collectively as a community, the intelligence community and the screening entities cooperate significantly. DHS has invested a number of people to set up that redress process that we work with them on. And that's to help that innocent traveler. And it's also to help facilitate maybe the non-innocent traveler, to work with that process as well. So there's always going to be those stories, and there's always going to be that 6-year-old that's on the no-fly list. There's no 6-year-old on the no-fly list. But the reality today that you've got is that these devices can be hidden, and the innocent traveler, that kid, you've got a guy that put it in his underwear. That's a challenge. Again, it's a balancing act. You're not going to be happy either way. No one's going to be happy. I understand that. But we are trying as hard as we can.
Frank?
Two-part question. Firstly, and I know your job's as busy as can be already,
Right.
but taking that concept of the TSC and the information sharing approaches, can you extrapolate in terms of how that could perhaps be utilized vis-a-vis enabling suspicious activity reporting objectives by state and local law enforcement, so we can get to a truer, rich picture? And secondly...
Okay, hold. So are you feeding him question? Because that's a great question, number one. And number two, I'd look forward to answering it. What's number two, Bless?
Second question is, given the rash of recent domestic cases and the clean skin challenge, or no DROG information, how, and I want to expand a little on my 5I question,
Right.
how can we get to the point, or should we get to the point, where we can do real-time pinging, not compromising data, but real-time pinging,
Right.
with at least our closest allies, the 5I community? And secondly, what if we have U.S. persons on those databases? Can we make that available if they're known for terrorist activity, to get predictive?
Right. When you're sharing with our international partners, we don't share U.S. citizens with them. That's number one. Number two, there's a very small percentage of U.S. persons, not just U.S. citizens, but U.S. persons in TSDB. So that's number two. Number three, when you talk about sharing, I talked about an encounter. Okay, when an encounter occurs, the encounter produces intelligence. It produces intelligence of the individual, his movements, his associates. As an example, one of the routine things that we do, because it was a matter of course, when a law enforcement officer stops somebody in the street, we ask them, is there anybody else in the car? Now, there's some restrictions within various states that they can't ask beyond that. And so the officer doesn't go beyond his state mandates, but in most states, it's not unusual or unreasonable or unlawful for a police officer to say, ma'am, can I get your name, or sir, can I get your name as well? And so routinely, except in those states where you can't do it, routinely we'll ask the officer, is there anybody else with them? In cases like that, I give this one example that we had, that it was a western city on a western coast where an individual was stopped with 2 other people. And the example I give is that individual was watch listed in that particular jurisdiction, and the case agent was local. 2 other people were identified. 2 other people were also watch listed in a jurisdiction, call it the Midwest, and call it the far South. The case agents on all 3 of those cases didn't know that their subjects were associates, not only associates, but interfacings, but that they're actually together in a car. And so that identified associates. It identifies activity. It identifies where the person was, and things like that. That intelligence from that encounter is collected either by the law enforcement officer, by the Customs Border Protection individual, or the Department of State, collected by the case agent, i.e. the JTTFs, picked up, reviewed, and forwarded back into the system. So when I talked about between 400 and 1,200 add modifies and deletes, those adds are oftentimes a result of an encounter. Once we get that encounter, that positive encounter, we push that out to our partners as well. That goes out to the fusion centers who share it with our state and local law enforcement encounters. A police officer, a chief of police in a particular county, really appreciates, hey, by the way, this past month you had these number of encounters. And I'm even talking about, some very rural, remote places. I've gone out to talk and given presentations just like this about the Terror Screening Center, and then we'll have a little map that'll pop up, of Montana, and you'll see all these encounters that occurs in Montana. then I'll pop up a map of the United States and show all the encounters that occurred, within, a calendar year. And virtually every state is not, there's no state that's encounter-free. And so we push that out to the state and locals. The state and local fusion centers get that information as well. The fusion centers will look to see, did I have any encounters with this particular individual, and push it back. The example that I gave about the driver's license and all that information, the trick question that I ask is, when you look at it, you clearly recognize it was an encounter by a law enforcement officer. The trick question I ask when I do the presentation is, do you know who told me about this, how I got this information? And then everyone always says it's a cop. And I go, no, it's not a cop. It was actually a CIA agent. And they look at me. A law enforcement officer did get it. The agent picked it up, looked at it, said it's good intelligence. He used it. But more importantly, he submitted back into the system. It was sitting in Tide, in Tide's repository, in NCTC's repository. A CIA agent happened to be looking at that guy, pulled it up, and said, this is really good information. I was the deputy director at the time. He called me up. He says, Tim, this is really working. And, and I really appreciate it. I don't know how many times, the agency or members of the intelligence community will look at that, because it's available to them now. So that intelligence gets forwarded back. So it is, by my estimations, in my meager 24-year career, Mike, I don't know if you've seen anything more like that in terms of information sharing. It's unprecedented. We share with our international partners, we share with our state and local partners, and we share with the entire community. So it's nothing that I've seen. Now, this group has much more experience than I do. Probably could give us some more examples, but it's really an incredible positive approach.
We're going to get some of our journalists in. Tom?
Oh, so I don't really have.
That's not fair.
There's going to be a push to expand the select T list and no-fly list once Secure Flight takes over?
I think that's something certainly the administration should consider. I don't make those decisions. As I've told the review board, tell me what you need me to do. We've made some suggestions. The interagency review board, we're working with that process. We've actually gone to the deputies a couple times, to work through that. That's going to eventually go up to the administration to ultimately make a decision. Every time an event occurs, even when an event doesn't occur, you learn from it. I didn't mention, I think we have, I was surprised because when I first started, I was trying to figure out how many encounters will we have a day. And, I had no idea. And no one knew. I was thinking maybe we have 15 in a month. We had 15 the first day. We average between 50 and 150 encounters a day. Anywhere between 30 and 50% of those are positive. So, we see, anywhere between 30 and 50, 30 and 75 known or suspected terrorists every day. Every day.
Pam Benson, CNN.
Hi. The reasonable suspicion criteria, what was the criteria for that, and how is it likely to change in light of
Before that?
Before 1225.
Right.
And how is it likely to change, things like single source information?
Right.
How is that going to affect?
The reasonable suspicion standard came out as a result of an interagency group that started in mid to late 07, and February of 08 it came out, the reasonable suspicion standard came out. Before that, we really didn't have a very specific standard. Each agency had their own standards, and they submitted the watch listing based on that. And as a result of that, again, the watch listing process was a learning process that we had gone through. So in February of 08, the reasonable suspicion standard came out. It came out as a collective group that said this is what the standard should be. It eventually was codified by the deputies that came out and said here's how it's going to be. Part of the presidential review that came out a couple months ago, it actually tasked the TSC to take a look at the reasonable suspicion standard, to take a look at the no-fly selectee standards, and make recommendations. We are in work on that right now, and I think I hesitate to say we're close to being complete. I did that in front of Senator Lieberman's group, and he says, okay, when is that going to be? I think it'll be very, very soon that we're working. In fact, I actually left the meeting today early to come here for this because I had promised this months and months ago, so I didn't want to renege on it. But we're in the process of doing that, teeing that up. It's not me running it, it's a group, from the White House, NCTC, and myself, and the intelligence community, and I think we're going to have some recommendations that the deputies and the White House will be able to review and come out with some policy very, very soon.
I guess what does reasonable suspicion mean in the terms of how do you determine that?
I testified in December for the Homeland Security and actually laid it all out in excruciating detail about what reasonable suspicion was and what our folks will use. Reasonable suspicion based on articulatable intelligence or information that the individual is associated with terrorism. And I'm not going to go that excruciating detail, but you can. I did it because I knew that there was going to be questions associated with that. So if you pull that up, I know that you can find it. I know that Eileen has pulled it up, and we've had chats about that as well from AP. It's the people that work with it every day. If I have reason to believe that this guy is associated with terrorism, they would be watch listed.
Eileen, good segue.
I have a question about secure flight. Some of the airlines have already transitioned to it.
Right.
Can you tell if it's working, and how do you tell if it's working?
Right now, great question again. Right now, they're in the test phases where they're actually where TSA is being fed into that information. They're still going with the existing screening, and they're kind of balancing it right now. There's a number of small carriers. There is one major carrier that's been doing it now for a period of time. And they're working through the testing. IT solutions are very difficult. There's been challenges with secure flight, but I got to tell you, with DHS, TSA, candidly, when we had to be up and running, I had to connect with, NCIC. That made me connect with all state and local law enforcement. Secure flight has to connect with all of the carriers. And when you're talking about seamless connections to feed, passenger information so that they can screen it against that. And then there's the privacy rules and issues that they've got to comply with. And so, that process takes time. It's in the test phases. And from what I understand, that those are proceeding very well. And I think it's scheduled to come out again at the end of this year.
Others? Yes.
I think there was a hand.
Oh.
I saw the hand there.
All right.
Question to follow on with the expansion of the no-fly select, have you heard?
Let's use that microphone. Okay. It's right there.
I didn't say expansion of no-fly selectee.
Okay, well, have you had more adjudications since the air carriers began their own screening, or began having TSA screening?
Well, the air carriers have been screening since '03. I can't answer that because that's TSA, and I don't get into the actual numbers. All I get is the 50,000-foot view. It's going well, and we're still testing. So that's the best I can do.
There's one there.
Thanks.
Sir.
I wanted to ask about
I think they're giving you a mic.
regarding biometrics.
You mentioned the movement towards biometrics.
Right.
Can you talk about specifically how that's going to play out? I mean, is there one area that the watch list is really going to be making use of biometrics? Is it a certain kind of biometrics?
Obviously fingerprints, as I mentioned, irises, and as I mentioned, photos. Having a photo and being able to screen against it, especially if it's no-fly, is very helpful. But you bring up a good point, and let me talk about it. I talked about how we identify known or suspected terrorists. Okay, there is no, that I'm aware of, any driver's license equivalent to be a terrorist. There is no terrorist card. Bin Laden can't walk into a facility and get his card and say, okay, I'm Bin Laden, I'm a terrorist. Here's my print. Get a picture, and let me be a card-carrying terrorist. KSTs are identified through intelligence. Intelligence is not black and white. It's intelligence. You get fragments of intelligence. With that, you also get fragments of biometrics. We have, from an IED, you may get a print. And that may be watch listed, and you may be to identify an individual associated with that. So understand, too, the challenges that you have with the watch list. People don't voluntarily say, I should be on the watch list. They don't come in and get their picture taken. We get it through intelligence. We may get it through an overhear. We may get it because we've got a case on somebody and they're talking to somebody else, and you develop facts that would push to that particular case. there's just a plethora of ways that people are identified through the intelligence community. When you get that, you get fragments of information. And again, how do you balance that? You know, you're balancing civil liberties with actually the person. And that's a real challenge. You can't be right anyway. If some innocent person is delayed, that's bad. But they're going to get delayed. And that's the byproduct of watch listing with names. If we got prints from everybody, it'd be easy because here's the print. The reality is, and this was, again, very public, the biographical information is a very small subset that what we have in TSDB. We get the vast majority from our DoD counterparts, that actually do the screening and things like that. So it's a challenge. It will be very helpful. The challenge with the no-fly selectee list is we're really striving to get as much identifying information on those individuals as possible, so that we don't have the misidentification, so we can keep commerce moving. But it's really a challenge.
Can you comment a little bit on the role of the Department of Homeland Security? The average person on the street doesn't really understand the distinctions between the different agencies and would think, I would argue, that DHS plays a larger role in terrorist watch list consolidation than it actually does. How much of a player have they been? And what are your comments about it generally?
Let me talk about DHS is a huge player, huge player. First, you have, with the watch listing process, you have the process by which we get the nominations, okay? DHS is a partner in terms of nominations, but that, candidly, is a much smaller portion. The intelligence community, the FBI, carries, and the intelligence community, carries the lion's share of nominations, okay? So when you look at this graph, this is the amount of work, and so you got the intelligence community, all of those components working aggressively to identify that nugget of information that's going to put the guy over the edge to be watch listed. So in terms of the watch listing process, that's a much more limited role, but they still have a role. So then what happens is the Terror Screening Center consolidates that and pushes it out to DHS, Department of State, TSA, which is still Department of State. And so about between 60 and 75% of our encounters are DHS encounters, whether they're TSA or CBP. So, they don't do the watch listing, but in terms of the tip of the sword, they're the tip of the sword. And so they're the ones that see the people. They're the ones that call us and say, how should I deal with this individual? Through NTC, the National Targeting Center, and we coordinate the vast majority of encounters that we have with them. And they coordinate with the JTTFs, and so they have a huge role. And they're the face of the watch listing. How they react and how they don't react, and what they get, what they don't get. And it's not just the watch list. They're also looking for indicators to, why is this guy acting the way they're doing? It's 40 degrees out and you're sweating profusely. Why is that, sir? I don't know. Maybe it's because I have a bomb on board. I don't know. So, and you've got the Centennial Bomber, the Millennium Bomber. I'm not sure if that individual, I can't remember back then because it was 2000, if that guy was watch listed or not. Probably wasn't. That was just based on behavior. That was a Customs Border Protection guy doing his job. And so it's a mix. I call it the watch listing enterprise. The watch listing enterprise is consistent with the partnership that we have with NCTC. Couldn't do it without them, obviously. Couldn't do it without the FBI. Couldn't do it without all the nominators. And couldn't do it without the points of the spear. TSA, DHS. Just couldn't, and Department of State. Couldn't do it without any of those. So it is truly an enterprise, a governmental enterprise.
Kyle.
Tim, just talking about it in terms of an enterprise, one of the questions that comes to mind, at least to me, is what are the metrics for success? And by that is it's one thing to say that, okay, we have an encounter, or we've had a hit, or we've had a name that's on the base, on the database, has popped up in a roadside stop or whatever. Are there any? Has there been any analysis done, any kind of assessment done in terms of sort of a qualitative evaluation of the success or mission impact of TSC?
A number of ways. One, obviously prevent a terrorist attack. There's been a lot of challenges to that, but clearly we fail if we have a terrorist attack, if the individual is watch listed. The challenge with the watch list is we have to identify that he should be on the watch list. That doesn't account for people that we don't know about. Some of the challenges we have, and I will talk about particular agencies, we check constantly in the NCIC for positive first name, last name, and date of birth, and to see if they called us. We don't get 100% call on particular police departments, not because of lack of training or lack of will, it's just for some reason they didn't call. So we strive for that type of encounter to be 100%. I can think of an agency kind of near and dear to my heart, not because I was associated with them, just because of the number, Arlington Police Department. Arlington Police Department has a 100% call-in rate. That's not unreasonable, especially because Arlington is where one of the terrorist attacks occurred. I know the chief personally, and he personally talks to his officers about if you get a hit, you call. So we strive for that. And what we do is when we identify percentages, lower percentages, we reach out to those law enforcement entities and do presentations. And so we look at that as well. We look at the success of our information sharing with our partners, with the fusion partners, and to identify ways that we can do it better. We constantly identify countries, for the information sharing. And so, it is, and we could always get better at the screening. The positive encounters, the negative encounters that we have. How can we make that streamline that system, make it better? The redress process, how can we streamline that? How can we help the innocent traveler? And we work with our partners on that as well. So there's a lot of metrics, and I'm kind of a metric guy, and you can talk to my staff and ask them how they appreciate our metrics and whether we're doing it.
Burton.
Thank you. This is a really elementary issue. How assured are you that the various agencies involved and your own and so forth are handling the various variations of names, particularly those that come through transliteration?
Right.
And I don't mean even the deliberate things, but just different agencies transliterate differently. Different national, if it's transliterated via the French, it's different than it is if it's transliterated via the German. Are there algorithms that handle all this? Or, like I was just filling out my census form yesterday. And I looked at it and I said, this is fine for all of us Anglo-Saxons. It's not set up for those of Arabic heritage in the United States. It just isn't.
Okay. No, that's a great question. It's a challenge. I mean, when you work a name-based system, it's a challenge. Do we have algorithms that do that? No, what we're working with our partners NCTC to come up with conventional, how do you spell Mohammed? There's multiple ways. And if you get a Mohammed, how do you deal with that? And so we're working, with our partners in terms of naming conventions is one of the things that we're doing. The other thing is, and I talked about, the problem with the list, it's names. And so what has the intelligence told us about how this individual spells his names? How do they use it? And some of the variations with that. It's a challenge. It will always be a challenge when you're working a name-based system. I'd love to be able to get to completely, 100% biographical, but I don't think that's realistic. So it is a challenge. No, we don't have an algorithm that will do that. We are working with our partners for some naming conventions on some of the common names. But then you rely upon some other identifying information, like a date of birth. And I know you're going to tell me some countries don't really capture date of birth. And so what about a passport number? What about other identifying information? So we work that as well. So it's a challenge.
Maybe one final question. One back.
Tim, you sort of had a unique opportunity going in and helping to start the Terror Screening Center from day one, leaving to do a number of different assignments in the Bureau, coming back. And you came back to an organization that didn't quite get there on a number of initiatives that you had started, and I think the sense is that you're driving that to get there. In your view, what's the next thing that needs to happen to make either the Terror Screening Center or the process that much better?
Mike, that's a great question. There's always challenges with a big organization. There's challenges about making sure that you're uniformed, making sure that you're consistent, when you're just doing name checks, when you have encounters, making sure that is consistent, making sure that the nomination process is consistent. I think probably the next challenge, as I mentioned, is probably a couple-fold. The biometrics is a challenge to make sure that we get as much biometrical information as we can so that we limit the false identities. That would be one. And the other one is, and I mentioned it kind of in the beginning, the transactional interfaces. It's not acceptable that we have it in our databases for 5 or 6 hours and DHS doesn't. That's unacceptable. Department of Homeland Security has a new system. It's WLS, the Watch Listing Service, which is going to consolidate all of DHS, and so we'll be able to feed it to one. So we're working with that transactional interface with that. That should be due out later this year. And so we strive to make sure our IT is state of the art. You talked about, sir, about naming conventions. We actually have probably the most advanced search algorithms in TSDB. It's actually a cocktail of different searches, and we took the best, especially when you're dealing with Arabic names, some of the challenges with that, and put it into a cocktail, and we've actually used that as kind of the standard among our other partners as well. So the challenge is that we want to make sure that we get the information out in a timely manner. To me, that's instantaneous, and until we hit that, I'm not going to be satisfied. That we do it, that when we screen somebody, we do it exactly the same way, we use exactly the same criteria, so that's consistent. That we identify our successes. This is what we found, and this is the best way to do it, and we take advantage of those best practices, and then we continue to drive. I think you talked about it as well. I can't remember your name because you lost your card. Pam. When you talked about some of the ramifications of what could occur, is the screening going to get more or less? I'm not sure there's going to be a lot of changes. There are going to be some changes with the implementation. There are some challenges with single source reporting that we're making recommendations for as well. I see that that encounters are going to go up. They may go down a little bit, but we've got to handle those efficiently. And so those are some of the challenges that we have. We cannot sit and be complacent. Lives are at stake. People that I care about that live in this community are at stake. And so we will never, we can never rest. We have constantly have to be vigilant to make sure that what we know, we got to make sure that we pass it out.
There was a hand that I didn't see until just now, but this will be the final question.
Oh, Clark, this question takes us down another couple hours worth of.
I'm sure you can make it short.
I'll try to make it short.
So thank you for your service. It's good to see a Marine actually get some risk.
Semper Fi.
We're talking terabytes of data. We're talking eternal shelf life.
Right.
Who owns data?
Not that hard. Terabytes before it gets to the TSC. Terabytes with the intelligence community. Terabytes with maybe the FBI. They're working at abilities to connect the dots. You got to understand when it comes to us, the dots have already been connected, and we have what the agencies feel that this guy should be watch listed. So when we get those, we don't have terabytes. With us, you're dealing with 400,000 people. That's megaseconds to go through. So I get, NCTC deals with it, deals with a much higher volume that we do. NCTC deals with thousands of pieces of information every day. They're looking at IT solutions to be able to mitigate that. It's a challenge. That's always going to be a challenge. The president came out about this recent event that occurred on Christmas Day and talked about, and there were some positive things from that. And it's true. It wasn't an information sharing problem. 9/11 was. This wasn't. I can remember, a couple years after 9/11, we talked about sharing, all known or suspected terrorists with law enforcement officers. You got to be kidding me. So, and the positive result that we got out of that. So it wasn't information sharing. It was connecting the dots. Connecting the dots with terabytes of information is always going to be a challenge. And so we're always looking for ways, IT solutions and human solutions, to be able to come up with that. When you identify, challenges with watch listing, you make adjustments for that. We're learning. There is not a government in the world, other than the United States, that has a comparable TSC. I've talked to a lot of governments about doing it, but the challenge that they have is the information sharing between their agencies. We've torn down that wall. We don't have that. When I talk to, a number of countries, that's the challenge. In some cases, when we share with them, they talk about, could you share with us and share with this other department? We go, you guys got to get it together. So that's not a challenge here, and that's a good thing. So we are learning, but the connect the dots is always going to be a problem. That's where it's always going to be a problem. But the positive side of that is that every member of the community understands that. Every member of the community is spending hours upon hours to make sure that that doesn't occur. A 12, 15, 16-hour day, and I'm saying this to this group because that's normal, but that's normal for us. Getting home before 8 or 9 o'clock at night is kind of a treat that we haven't had for a long time. Somebody, a very close friend of mine, we're walking out of TSC to come here, and he mentioned, he goes, normally in the government, especially in the U.S. government, between Christmas and New Year's is really kind of a slack time. I walked in Christmas Day with a turkey dinner for my call center people, and I said, anything happening? And they looked at me and they said, something's a little crazy in Detroit. We need to talk to you about it. And I was introduced into, and believe me, I called my wife and said, look, I'm tied up. And she said, no way. I said, way. And the reality is that when you take a look at the time, nothing against our media because it was Christmas Day, but she didn't believe it for hours until it got eventually picked up on the news. And when it got picked up on the news, it got picked up pretty big. And I said, told you, I'm really here working. So, it's a challenge. But that's, and I'll tell you, Christmas Day, people didn't have a problem coming in. My guys, when they're screening this stuff, literally some of the scrubs that they had been doing, post that event, you should have seen him. I walked up to one guy, he was on hour 18, and I looked at him and I said, Mike, you really need to go home. He said, sir, this can says 4 hours, I'm only 2 hours into it, so I got a good 2 hours left. So you're talking about truly dedicated people that, really understand the mission, understand what could happen if they fail, and failure is not an option with them. So I appreciate the question, sir, and thank you for your service as well.
And that's a very good way to end. We're grateful to you, Director, for the work you do and the work of your team. So thank you very much for coming today.
Thank you, and I appreciate the question.
Thank you very much. What a great job.
Shut up. We conclude the commission about this form of you actually started 25 years ago.
Nice to meet you. Yes, thank you. No.